innovation without insights, right? So there is no innovation without insights. There is no ideation without insights. There is no action without insights. So insights is found fundamentally the starting point of innovation. And we look everywhere for insights. We look at competitors. We look at substitutes. We look at the past for insights. But one of the best places to look for insights is into the future, and to be able to see what the future looks like. So that crystal ball. If you had a crystal ball and you could see what the future looks like, you might be able to create the future before other people can and be able to drive towards it much faster. Trouble is there is no crystal ball out there. Trouble is we have not been able to find a grandmother who really can forecast the future or look at your hands and tell you what the future looks like. Right? So that future, understanding what that looks like is very hard. So there are techniques which have been developed over the many, many years, which allows us to be a little better to be able to predict what's going to come next. And this techniques allows you to then maybe plan for preparing for those scenarios, not necessarily guaranteeing the scenarios will happen, but certainly preparing for them, which allows you to have plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D also behind that. So you are much more risk diversifying what the future is going to come with. So if you could tell the future, then you might be able to create that future and plan for it. But if you don't know, then you got to wait for the future to come to you. And it is what it is, right? And so the front end of innovation is foresight. Some will say sight, insight, foresight. And this foresight is increasingly becoming important around the world as companies begin to recognize that those who can see that future earlier might be able to respond to it faster, so you capture the market sooner, versus waiting to see what competition is doing, waiting to see what a customer might be asking soon and then responding to it. Instead of reacting, we want to be responding to this thing. And so today in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's a government entity called a Future Foresights entity. In Philippines, there's a Future Foresight department, a ministry that's been created. It's only 2 people right now. But they are beginning to understand that if you can future foresight things, it's going to be amazing. We had a colleague by the name of Peter Schwartz, who we used to work with. It was a global business network, and they were at Shell, and they were basically the thought leaders in thinking about how to drill holes and where to drill holes to be able to make sure you get the oil. They began to think about how to plan for these futures. It still is an art for 99.9% of the population. Today, we're going to hear about the art becoming a science, the art becoming a management discipline, the art that you and I can learn and distribute it with everybody else. And with that, I'm going to introduce Antonio and Pedro. These guys are really the leaders of this organization, Ava Consulting, and they will be sharing with us what is foresight, because their foresight content and knowledge is now on the GIMI platform and is available to be distributed in terms of tests and certifications and everything else. And let's hear from them. Let's get excited, but let's recognize there is no innovation without foresight. And so these are the guys. Let's go. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Hitendra. Well, it's an honor to be here, of course, and to hear Hitendra. Hitendra, you were at the core of one of the key organizations, the Global Business Network, that then was part of the Monitor Group by Michael Porter, and then I think bought by Deloitte. That's where and of course it's a privilege that this endeavor that we are developing together, Alva and Jimmy and it with all the development of the content, the frameworks that we did and we are still doing, and now with the application of these frameworks of this literacy in a very practical way, and I'm really excited with this collaboration. Thank you for that. Actually, tomorrow we are finishing as Dr. Zurak said, but talked about the Dubai Police. Actually, tomorrow we are finishing the final meeting of the first implementation of the organizational certification, also in Dubai. And we already have 3 generations of people that are certified in future foresight by GIMI. So it's we are starting, but we are really excited with the process. I'm a slow starter, so I was listening to the discussion, and I forgot I had to present something, but I will do it. I will focus. I'm a slow starter, but I will gain pace. So I was, we are among experts and partners. So I will not simplify too much as it. I think I can do it, Hitendra, but for this forum, I think I will not have to do it. I will try to, to be at the same time complex and simple. I'll try to do both. And there are, of course, people here that are very much experienced on this subject. For instance, Dr. Zuraiki was part of the first generation of people certifying future foresight, and we had great discussions. We are still going with great discussions at the beginning, gave us great feedback. Also, Professor Carlos Arruda, that our paths have crossed already many times, and it's a real honor to again discuss this subject with everybody, and also with Carlos and Dr. Zuraik, etc., and Hitendra, of course. So it's for them and for some of you, maybe some of the things I will say will be very basic and maybe a repetition. So I have to say this. I will share a presentation if you allow me. I'm not a fan of PowerPoints, but that's how we communicate. So I will share my screen. And I prepare a short presentation, and I will be very quick, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And then I think the most interesting part will be the discussion. So I'll try to be quick, but if you have any questions, please ask them. Either you can interrupt me or we can do it at the end. So this is me. Well, the past doesn't justify the future, but I've been working, I always say 20 years, but to be honest, I started in 1999, so it's already 23. But I say 20 years around. And yes, I'm an economist, a PhD in management, already working in the relation between foresight, scenarios, and strategy in France. And I'm a professor in a top business school here in Portugal, a researcher at the engineering school, and also at Contemporary History Institute, Engineering Contemporary History as a researcher. And I'm the CEO of Alva, so I've created a boutique consulting company that works globally, specialized in foresight, but in foresight as Hitendra presented. So it's foresight not as a silos, but in connection with decision-making, strategy, and innovation processes as a way of refreshing and bringing new tools and new perspective and new evidence-based methodologies to these processes that are part of the organizations. So this is Alva. I will just pass this slide. So the first challenge is why do we care? Why do we care about the future? And of course, it looks obvious in a way, but we could say, well, there are no facts, so why do we care? We care about the future because we have expectations. So we have expectations, and those expectations and we have information about the future. So those expectations, they just come and have a huge impact on the present. If there were no expectations, if there was no information about the future, maybe we wouldn't need foresight. But we do it. It's like we always do it. And the challenge is to make it in a more methodological, sound, and evidence-based way. That's the challenge. We always do it, but we can do it in a way that works, that usually works, with a methodology, with a step-by-step methodology, and also being able to choose different methodologies. So, and the last 2-3 years have been amazing. In terms of professionally, were the best years. So we have huge demand, and it's for obvious reasons, because the more uncertainty there is, the more people are sensitive and are demanding for these kind of processes. In my case, was from a niche market, I would say, to mainstream. So it's almost everywhere. Big companies are interested, consulting, training, etc. So there's a big interest, and because there's a lot of uncertainty, and scenarios and foresight are a practical way of including uncertainty and not covering but including uncertainty in your decision making, expliciting and dealing with this uncertainty, and don't consider that forecast assumption that there will be no structural change. That we as economists and managers, when we do forecasts, we assume that there's no structural change. There's no high inflation. There's no COVID. There's no technological breakthrough. There's no Gov coins in China in February. So if we assume all this, we can forecast. But if we accept that there's change coming in the next years, and where our decisions will be tested, we need a way of including this change or this potential change in our decision making, innovation, and strategy processes. So, and of course, a good strategy. What is the good innovation portfolio? What is the good innovation portfolio? Is of course an innovation portfolio that is aligned with an idea of the future, with a picture of the future that is sound. So how to develop this picture of the future? You can call it scenarios, or you can combine trends, etc. But so a good innovation portfolio, a good investment portfolio, a good strategy is aligned with the sound, evidence-based, methodological sound picture of the future. So you can trust people that work in foresight, because we assume that we cannot predict the future. And because we cannot predict the future, we are more prepared. We tend to be more prepared. We tend to think about different futures because we have this ability as human beings, and then we have the methodologies and the tools to do it. And we cannot live without a provisional, of course, limited, we cannot encapsulate everything, but actionable and open picture of the future. And it's about planning, of course, plans and reports and PowerPoints and conclusions, but it's also about the way we think. It's about how our brain works, how we are able to acknowledge uncertainty and still move, not to be, we see this intellectual dilemma that sees all possibilities and gets stuck, doesn't move because, everything is moving. No. The challenge is to acknowledge uncertainty, acknowledge there are different possibilities, understand what they mean for our business, for our industry, for our company, and then move and act. And as understanding the risks and understanding with limited information and with provisional scenarios, and of course, but it's much better than just acting just because we are used to. We are used to do like that. It used to be successful. It used to be successful. Yes. Like, in the 19th century, all the urban transport was organized around horses. So, and it used to be a great business to rent horses and all that. So if looking at the past, our success, we just have to keep doing it a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently. And that when there's structural change, that simply doesn't work. Okay. So a key difference is the difference between foresight and forecast. And the main difference is that we kill a Latin expression. So there's this very famous Latin expression called with ceteris paribus. In Latin, actually, it's caeteris paribus, meaning when we want to forecast something, we keep all the other variables constant. So we say, if there's no inflation, if there's no technological breakthroughs, we can forecast sales, for instance. And that's correct. The problem is with the assumption. So in foresight and scenarios, we just don't artificially assume that the other variables that are relevant to my business or to the idea that I'm studying will remain constant. So we have to look. We try to understand that structural change. Then, in every foresight process, that's what we call horizon scanning. For instance, in GIMI's framework, innovation framework, you go and look for trends. You look for change. You have this future, past, and future step. So here we analyze trends, of course. Then we analyze mega trends, a particular type of trends, long term, like urbanization, digitalization, climate change, mega trends. We analyze wildcards, disruptions, not particularly those like a comet destroys the planet. We usually is not very interested for us. Well, of course, if we are NASA, maybe it's interesting. But if we are a normal company, what we look for is for wildcards, disruptions that might have a big impact, not in the world, but in our industry. And that's a lot of fun. Even with kids, I would say, Itendra, because it's really fun to look for wildcards. To have a basket, to have a room where you can think the unthinkable, as Herman Kahn used to say, think the unthinkable. For Herman Kahn, back in the 40s and 50s, it was the nuclear war. And it was a way of avoiding it. To consider it was a way of avoiding it. And it's really fun to look for low probability, high impact events, even if we don't build our scenarios with them, but we have a discussion, we have a thought process, we stretch our minds, and then we really focus on uncertainties. That you also have a part on your GIMI process, innovation process, where you talk a little bit about high uncertainty, high impact variables, elements, if you want. And then with those uncertainties, we'll build scenarios, of course. And then you build scenarios, different ways of building. The most well-known is the Global Business Network, where Itendra participate, but Shell, the metrics way, two uncertainties for scenarios. I will present an example, but there are other ways of doing it. And today, for a practitioner, it's important to understand that for your specific case, for your challenge, you are able to adapt and change your methodology. It's like innovation. So there's no one recipe for everything. So you have a process, and then you can do it in different ways. You have to adapt. You can go deeper. You can deal with 4 or 5 uncertainties and can adapt because you know the different ways, the pros and cons of the different methodologies. So that's the challenge. So the regular process is really, really simple. So you have a challenge. We call it focal issue. It can be an open challenge, like the future of innovation certification in the world. Imagine. So we can have a challenge that usually encapsulates a big challenge for the company. And you can have supporting questions. So you can have a set of meetings and you detail a little bit what do we really want to know from this foresight and scenario process. So you have like a briefing. Then you just go and look for what we call drivers of change. You're still not worried if they are uncertain, if they are trends. You look for factors that might have an impact. A little bit like the business opportunity map in a way, where you look for drivers and elements in many aspects of the internal, and we call it drivers of change. So elements that are changing in a way and might have an impact on our focal issue. And then you differentiate, that's the traditional one, between elements that almost for sure will be there, but whose consequence still not developed. Imagine China's golf coins. So there are already some countries with golf coins, Bahamas and other countries that already implemented golf coins, but China will be in February. So it almost for sure will be there, but its consequences still not developed. So that's a typical predetermined element. Okay, so the consequences of that variable in our focal issue still didn't develop, although all the evidence points towards the fact that element will be part of the future. So we call that predetermined element, and then we look and we look for what we call key uncertainties. And the key uncertainties, if we find the 2 key uncertainties that really make a difference, you cross them and you have this magic matrix. 4 scenarios, 2 uncertainties, 4 scenarios. And then you tell the story. And the story is not too hard to tell. It's like when you ask a manager, please describe me your industry. Every manager will be happy to do it. So you will do it works like this. This is the level of competition. These are the technologies. This is the benchmark. These are the clients. These are the suppliers. So if you ask about the present, they will talk and describe. Here, when you ask for scenarios, it's the same, but in the future and with two assumptions, meaning the configurations of the uncertainties. So at the beginning, they might stop a little bit. Well, you asked me to talk about the future, but then, it's an amazing exercise of thinking about the future of the industry. And the other interesting thing is that if managers have this fixed idea that they know where we are heading, these kind of exercises really ask them to consider different futures. Then they can go back to their preferred future, but at least they tried in a kind of wargaming style. They at least they consider a different future from the one they had in their heads, not very structured. So it's a way of decision makers to discover by themselves that there are some elements of uncertainty that maybe they were not aware, and that might affect their expected future. Okay, so then you have to consider, imagine you have digitalization, and if digitalization is a predetermined element, you should consider digitalization in all the scenarios, of course, because it will be part of all the futures. Of course, it's very different if you have digitalization with low inflation or high inflation. So the consequences of a predetermined element in each scenario will be different. Although the element is the same, the consequences in the narratives will be different. Okay, so I will move on. Just an example. So imagine confinements, COVID. We are all talking about COVID. Imagine this very simple uncertainty, very general. I don't have a focal list, it's global scenarios, okay? I don't have a specific industry, just global scenarios. So imagine, COVID will go back to normal. Finally, it will be, Omicron will be just the beginning of the end of this pandemics, and we'll manage we will continue in this, with much less dead, and we'll go back to normal, and China will open finally, and we'll be able to travel, and we'll be able to all meet one of these days, etc., back to normal, or no. After Omicron, the next will be a little more aggressive. People are becoming a little bit hysterical, and China will not open. New outbreaks, perennial limitations. We open, we close, we open, we close, and we'll be like this for the next 5-6 years. And imagine another one, which is global value chains. Everybody's talking about it. Global value chains. So in one side, you have this idea that after the crisis, on the upper side, they will be reconstructed. So they will be reconstructed with safe, reliable networks and trade pathways and etc. And trust will be built between US, Europe, China, etc. So, there was this patient period, but they will be reconstruct the value chains, global value chains. And the other one is they will be more close, more individual, as you saw now, what we call about the nearshoring or even inshoring, this new trend. The world, it's the end of the flat world, and everybody will be, we'll be trading, but we need to control as much as we can of the value chain, of the key products that we need in our region. So it'll be a more, divided world, the lower part. So if you cross them, you have, just a name. A scenario is not just a name. It's a detailed description, quantification, analysis, but okay, just a name I don't have time. This one I call it was very serious, it was scary, we were afraid, but it was like the Schumpeterian. You remember Schumpeter, the creative destruction. So it was a period of renovation, and now it will be, we'll enter the glorious 30 years after the Second World War, and the world will be even more amazing because globalization is now much more manageable, and there's this new amazing space called the digital space. Okay, so this is like the optimistic renew of the capitalist system after this, scary and serious shock. This one is it's a united world. This means that we will be a generation that will be in crisis. Our generation will have to manage this. This is the new normal. And this brings us together. How can we? It's a global threat. So we are. This is a We Are the World. Remember, in the 80s, I think there was this movement, this song called "We Are the World." So we are together. We are together on this. So we need institutions. We need legislation that allow us to deal with this global threat. How can we compete and have new wars and new disputes if we are facing a common threat? So this is a more like a new planning era. Empathy, United Nations, strong international cooperation, a positive view of the humankind, I would say, when facing a threat. This is what I call strong men, because actually they are almost all men. And now we don't have Angela Merkel, so most of the leaders are men. You have Putin, Erdogan, Xi, I was writing, Orban, Modi, Trump, Biden, Netanyahu, all men, and etc. So this is the idea that, we go back to normal, but we don't trust each other again. So the trust was broken, and we just, now it's like it's a negative perspective on international relations, a more Hobbesian world, if you want, conflict, state capitalism, fragmentation, and low trust. And then this is the Game of Thrones, long winter, like 7 years winter. It's the more pessimistic, I would say. So it's like, we don't trust, and we have it's a closed world. It's like the community. We just care about what's next to us. Our community, it's us versus them. So it's proximity, community, self-sufficiency. You see self-sufficiency again, industrial policy, protectionism, etc. Well, okay, this is just to show you the traditional way of building scenarios, and then we can look for challenges, strategies in different scenarios, and test all the ideas. I will move on, and then we can go back here if you want. So, okay, just global scenarios. So, again, focal issue, a time horizon. You define how many years you will think into the future, what we call the long term. The long term can be 50 years, like Shell, energy paradigm, or can be 1 year, 3 years. Usually, for instance, telecommunications usually used to be 3 years. Now I'm working with 1 year, 2 years time horizon, because if you have more uncertainty, the long term becomes, closer to the present. So focal issue, time horizon, looking for drivers of change, the disruptions, the small signs of change that we call weak signals, small signs of potential change, megatrends, uncertainties, preterm elements, and then you can build the metrics. But the question is, what if you have 3 uncertainties? What do? You just pick 2 by chance? What if you have 3 key uncertainties? What do? One thing you can build a cube. If you have 3, you can still manage. So you build a cube with 3 uncertainties, each one with 2 possibilities, 2 configurations, 8 scenarios. So you can build a cube. I have my room full of cubes that I actually built. Scenarios, 8 possibilities. Okay? But if you have more, how about if I want to deal and consider 6 uncertainties? How do? I cannot do the metrics. I want to keep that complexity. They are really strong. I want to consider. You can do other things. There are other tools. So for instance, this is one of the tools that we call morphological analysis. So what we do, we combine the different configurations for the different uncertainties, and the scenarios now are combinations of configurations, are pathways. Okay. So this, I don't want to explain all this, of course, but the idea here is to tell you experts in innovation, in scenarios, in foresight, in strategy, that it's important to not to have the same response to all the questions, and to be able to adapt, to understand the methodologies, to have the concepts, the literacy to understand the methodologies in order to pick the ones the ones that are right for the challenge. Okay, so this is, I think, one of my final, but it's a lot of information, but I just wanted the only message I wanted to share here is that then this skill, this literacy, and these tools can be and should be linked to innovation, strategy, and marketing tools. So, of course, they should be linked when you are looking for core competencies. When you define what are the core skills and competencies that you need to have in an organization, you are talking about the future. So you need to develop a picture of the future. When you talk about, the definition of the innovation intent, or how to, to make the case for change, why do we need to change? We need to change because the world is changing. So, and we need to adapt to a changing world in order to still continue to be profitable. When you build a business model canvas and you want to defend your idea, you need to be prepared for different scenarios. Otherwise, the investors will not trust you, but they ask you, what if COVID continues? What happens to your business model? So you need to prepare, and you can adapt your model. This you say, I know what to do. I have this picture of the future. This is the business model for this scenario. But if the sector goes into a different direction, I will change like this, this, and this. And this gives credibility to your business model, to your innovation portfolio, and how do your innovation portfolio allows you to cope with the different possibilities. Okay, so this is tools that most of you know, and then we articulate with scenario and foresight tools that we put together like in a Lego construction. And then what you do is you apply this in processes. I'll present you one. I will not go into detail, but it's a process. So it's a research workshop. So then the practitioner will be able to apply this language in a scenario building, strategy definition, innovation process. And this is just one that we implement very often, but it's just an example. Okay. So this is an introduction. Of course, I would like also, and it was what I was asked is just to give you a 2-minute overview what we are doing here with GIMI in terms of future foresight certification. So we are following the innovation model, of course, and we are trying to develop this new stream. And this new stream already has the individual future foresight certification with 3 levels: certified foresight professional, foresight leader, and chief foresight officer, and the organizational future foresight certification with a framework that either the organization itself or a third party can apply. And then we at GIMI, we evaluate the foresight maturity of the organization. For that, we use this framework that we call S4 Futures framework with these 4 key stages: scoping, defining the scope, the challenge that we have at hand; scanning, looking for information; scenarios, exploring the future; and then strategy, the link to decision-making and investment processes. So these are the 3 levels of the individual certification. We have implemented level 1, and this year we already have level 2. We predict to open the first level 2 generation. Level 1 certification, more about literacy with some tools, etc. Level 2 focusing on tools with exam, and level 3 is a case-based certification. The organizational certification, what we do, and we already apply it. We developed a framework of analysis. Based on this framework with the sub elements that we go and we look for evidence in the organization if these kind of processes exist, and then we attribute a score, and then there's a final classification of the foresight maturity level, very similar to the innovation one of the organization. And that's it. I think it was, I hope, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. I was very fast, but of course, I think the discussion will be more interesting. Hitendra.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Antonio. I think we are connecting the right sort of partnerships together to put together the right knowledge needed as we enter even into a more uncertain, a more chaotic world that we live in. I think strategy is no longer you plan and you can be okay for 3 years. Strategy has to be dynamic. And similarly, we have to do the same thing in terms of innovation and other things they would further out. Let me ask a question, and I see some people are raising their hands. So maybe if you can stop sharing the screen for a second so we can see all the faces. I'll start you off with one question in general. Is what are you seeing in terms of the uptake? What kind of people are saying, I want to be a CFO, certified foresight officer? What is their profile? What do they look like? What part of the organization do they work in? And who's funding them? And what's making them, what gives them power? Because this is so far out about the future that it's a staffing role, and staffing roles usually don't make money today. And as a result, if you're going to fire somebody tomorrow, that's the first people with HR and marketing that you let go. So what's the profile of the people who are willing to be courageous enough to say, I believe this is so important, so strategic? Give us an idea. Who is this person? You're on mute, I think. Ron, you're next on the question, okay?
Okay, thank you. Just to add on to your question while he's getting off mute, is if it's not a person, is it a pillar or a foundation of innovation and strategy that needs to be put in place? And who are the people who are responsible for putting in place that competency? So there's a leader, but there's also just the competency that's an important part of your platforms and foundation going forward. So how do you see both of those evolving in tandem?
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes, again.
Sorry, it was a connection thing, and can you still hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. So, sorry, Ron. I will ask you again because I was just trying to solve my technological problem. But I will answer first Jitendra's question. What is the? I would say that the ambitious future leaders, this is a key skill. So middle management that have the idea that in 3 years' time they will get boards and leadership positions, or in 5 years, because this is really empower for leaders. So leaders, when they talk about, they get empowered within an organization, if they're able to hold a coherent and ambitious image of the future for their sector, and to understand what those futures mean for the strategy of their organization, and to be able to design and lead internal foresight processes. This is I would say a key idea about a share characteristic of the people that usually are interested on this kind of processes. Of course, current leaders will gain a lot and are also interested, but special people that really have the ambitions to lead an organization towards the future, and this can be their way that this can really help them. These tools and this language can really help them to lead like a new perspective, a new field of play using the innovation language. Why are we heading towards this field of play? Because this field of play, in the way we see the future, will be a core. It will be essential for our organization to thrive. So this is it can be very young people with ambition, and it can be more mature managers that are facing. Imagine a very technical CFOs, so people that come from CFOs to a more strategic position. This is a really important. This can be a really important skill. Another thing I would like to add can be very interesting also for different. Imagine strategy and marketing departments, and they all have the same skills. They all know the basics of strategy and the tools of strategy, and some of and even innovation departments. And this can really differentiate as a skill set for people working on this department, because they will be the ones that the organization will call when, and that will be very likely because everybody is now interested on foresight. You didn't mention, for instance, the European Commission now as a a team, a foresight team, and a commissioner that is responsible for the future, and many European also governments and companies. So this can be also a skill set that differentiates traditional skills in terms of innovation and strategy and marketing, I would say. Ron.
Yeah, if I can just add to your comment, our experience is if you want to be the most interesting person in the room, this is it. You have insight, foresight about trends, about future. People are going to find you very interesting because you are able to see things and discuss things and make people say, I did not know that. Mm-hmm. If you are able to say what if and what else and talk about that, oh my goodness, you're an interesting person. So in management consulting, our best consultants in the planet, whether Monitor, ADL, McKinsey, those are the ones who can tell you about the future. The guys with foresight. And so that really excites everybody. So any one of you who wants to be the most interesting person in the room probably will benefit from becoming a future foresight expert. You will, because you know trends. You know how to intersect the trends. You can see scenarios. You can discuss anything at any moment. But that feeds your strategy. That feeds your marketing. That feeds your innovation. That feeds every conversation of your life. And therefore, you will come with something which is different and better. And for me, that's what I think is the most important thing is how do we train people to do this? And these guys have come up with a proposal with certification and standards and testing to make that happen. And Ron was asking an organization question. So why don't you ask?
So my question kind of derives from a long history of working with scenario groups at Shell Oil and other places that were in the leadership of this. And it is very problematic has been very problematic to have a person who is the chief foresight officer or the chief officer of the future. I mean, there's books out about the ministry of the future in the UN, et cetera. So, and they're good books, but at least in our experience, it's been more important to have a core competency in foresight and tying that to action so that the team that you have comes from multiple functions. It may reside primarily in strategy, but it involves people from other functions. They're all trained and it's tied to action. I think that's the weak link in this in the past 25 years has been it wasn't sufficiently tied to action. So now things are moving faster. It's easier to tie it to action. It's more important to be prepared, but there should be a module in here, in my view, about options and insurance. How do you make this something that the CFO and the CEO feel is important enough to establish as a core competency? How do you make it actionable? How do you value the different options you're pursuing, even though the scenario only has a 20% chance of success, of likelihood? You still have to be prepared for it. And so you buy insurance or you invest in options. But I think the whole world of options and insurance around preparedness and being ready to push the button, what's the trigger? So thinking about scenarios and their timing is really critical. And I think if you do that, then you can talk about building a competency, and then you can talk about the need for CEOs to be trained for small to medium-sized businesses, but for larger kind of cross-silo teams to be trained in organizations. And the thing we talk about a lot in the powers of and is to have partners. So you can't do it alone. So I remember working for the oil company in Oman a year or two ago. What if you, and they may not partner with NASA, but what if you had NASA as a partner and could really be thinking about how you explored the underworld or undersea? And what would you find out? What would that mean if you could be the leader in foresight and insight and ideas and innovation? So we've always said that foresight and insight are the key bridge between information and intelligence, which is important but not very differentiated, and ideas and innovation. So it is the key actionable competency that enables you to link intelligence, and everybody has market intelligence or product intelligence or technology intelligence, but how do you link that to ideas and innovation? And you can't do that without foresight and insight, but it is not a one-person job in my view. And so how do we do these certifications so that every company or every medium-sized company needs to have 4 or 5 people trained in this, not one person who's going to be sitting out on the end of a plank about ready to be kind of cut loose. And so how do you make this sustainable? That was the big thing at Shell. How do you make this sustainable? So we worked with the people who were head of that group for a long time. So I think if we can make this certification something that is more about certifying a competency, it might be stronger. So my question was really, should we do that, and how can we do that so it's not just for chief foresight officers, it's really for building a competency, and who do you train and how do you train them as a multidisciplinary team? Sorry.
Ron, no. I'm sorry for not referencing you before, but it's I will comment, but by respect, because I completely, that has been my fight for the last 20 years. Of course, it's we need a title, we need to call the people, we need to give the name, we need to promote, but the challenge. And it's great if the governments have this, and big companies have a department. It's great. That's a good thing. A lot of investment, and we have to work with them. And we also, and I work with them, and it's great. And people, but the key skill for me is to, you cannot work effectively and actionable, as you said, in foresight without being able to link it with innovation processes, decision-making processes, and strategy processes. So we do that. We have the frameworks and the templates, and we share those templates, level 1, but especially level 2, we do that. And as you saw, the strategy is within our framework. So, and that was one of the problems at the beginning, the futurists and that movement, because there were people that were specialized, but then they were unable in a way to communicate with innovation, and that always my perspective. Sometimes you don't even have to call it foresight. You just change the way you reorient your innovation and strategy processes. So you acknowledge change, and you give it like a push. You have a different perspective, more feature-oriented perspective. You don't even have to call it. And sometimes, just to add to what you said, I think it's really relevant. Many of my consulting work, sometimes, especially with big companies, is they call me, they say, look, we have this innovation process going on, then we have this strategy definition, and now then we have a strategy team. And the things don't stick together. Yeah. And sometimes I'm called to try to put everybody, to give it like a coherent perspective on the future. So you can have, and it's not important how you call it in that way.
Yeah. So there may be hundreds of stories, but just one anecdote that one can use is Peter Schwartz, who I think everybody kind of knows of as head of GBN when GBN was part of, or very closely aligned with Monitor Group. And Peter was casual, or was always pontificating about how he had done scenarios about jet planes flying into the Twin Towers in New York. He was very proud that he had identified scenarios a year or 2 or 3 before 9/11. And I, being a young punk, said, Peter, and everybody kind of, grimaced at me asking Peter a question. What good is it if you identify a scenario and you don't tie it to any action that you can take now, not after the planes hit the Twin Towers and you say, well, if you had just listened to me? No, what's the action you can take now, either to prevent it or be ready for it or whatever, but tying it to action. And therefore, since it's not often the most probable, it's not a 90% likelihood that planes are going to crash into the Twin Towers, if it's only a 10 or 20%, but still, what do you do? What triggers do you watch for? What pilot lessons in Minnesota do you monitor to see who's registering for them? But there's a whole bunch of things, and GBN never got to how do you justify investment in options and insurance and other things to really make sure you're ready for those scenarios. How do you truly make them actionable? So I'd like to see certification that really tied to actionability and really makes it for large numbers of people.
So
As
Ron,
just for
I think this is why this partnership with GIMI is so important. GIMI is almost like the back end of the Foresight certificate. As we connect to the fields of play, we connect to the strategic intent, we lock those things together. And so the actions are going to come by linking tightly to what we're trying to do. And even now, the work that we're doing in the Middle East is linked together. What Dr. Zurek is doing, what CR Partners is doing, is linking the GIMI work along with the Foresight work. But now we got it under the GIMI umbrella. And so with the GIMI umbrella, we begin to say, this is not isolation. They are tied. They're tied together. And it's not just one person championing it. It's a competency, as you were saying, Ron, very important. So I think, Antonio, that's where we are going. And the GIMI partnership will help us get there. But the inputs, I think, are valuable. You guys all know it. It's been a one-person job usually. And usually the person is trying. He is a rock star because he's futurist. But no, we need strategy people, marketing people, innovation people with that mindset. And then we're going to connect it to the innovation agenda and strategy agenda, which goes together. Let me get a question from Carlos. His hand has been up. He looks tired.
No, not at all. It's a pleasure.
Digital hand.
And I fully agree. If you don't tie to a strategy, and we did a study in Brazil with scenarios, how companies were using scenarios. And I realized that half of them put the scenario in the drawer. And then they talk about strategy. It seems different. It's totally unbelievable. But my question is very practical. We try to use artificial intelligence. Actually, we use Watson to help us design scenarios. Have you ever any experience of, and the results were not really outstanding. We were kind of disappointed, but we saw as a potential how to use artificial intelligence or machine learning to help you design the scenarios to give you more quality and more data, because it will open your eyes for new possibilities. Have you any experience on that, Antonio? And by the way, congratulations for the initiative. I agree, it's fantastic to connect foresight with innovation.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It's an honor to meet you again. Artificial intelligence, automation, data mining, all this, we used to call it other names, but especially in the scanning stage, there are some experiments. I participate in the engineering school at Técnico in Lisbon, and I did some research, and we have some prototypes, especially when, for instance, for looking for emergent tissue. So imagine you want to have, there are a lot of trend analysis and trend reports that you can find for your industry, but how can you find in an automatic fashion the new thing that you should pay attention to? And then there are some platforms that with whom we work that try to do that. But the big challenge, I would say, Carlos, from my experience, is that when you do it's a bit technical, but when you most of the algorithms are based on recognition of patterns. So pattern recognition, see things that are increasing, that appear more often, that start appearing in research or in papers or whatever, new technologies. But the problem is that when the pattern is strong enough, it's already kind of common knowledge. So, and we actually developed a semi-automatic scanning process. And what we do is that we, instead of being it completely automatic, we try to configure some of what the machine will look for, and the machine tries to looks for at the same time what is relevant for our industry, for instance, what is about the future, but also what is starting to develop. But we are still unable. I wasn't able to do it in our automatic fashion, but we were able to find maps of drivers of change that are generated by software in which we gave some commands in order to help the software to find novelty. And that's a project that I have, I think it's the future, especially in the scanning part. But of course, just the last thing, Carlos, is that it's not enough to be very smart and be aware of everything. If you want to make change, you have to, the key challenge is to organize processes of discovery. So it's completely different. If I tell you, Carlos, or Itendra or whatever, look at GovCoins. February, China will be a key moment. The government will have all the information about, will be able to put money in your pocket with GovCoins. That's an amazing transformation. The government, yes, and we'll know that the government will go to Carlos and not to some intermediary. And that's a big thing, really big thing, especially in big countries. But I can tell you that, okay. But the impact of you discovering this, so me organizing a process where you and your teammates that work in the financial sector, in a bank in Brazil, and you start discovering, I give you the materials, you analyze, and you discover that this will have a huge impact for private banking, for instance, it's completely different. It's like, even if it's the same discovery, if it's made, or at least partially made, not everything, but part of the processes should be discovered by the ones who then will put their energy and money and the credibility at stake, not by consultants.
Antonio,
Okay.
if I can add to that, couple of thoughts. This is why management consulting uses workshops of executives to go through the process for self-discovery. It's not that usually you cannot have come up with the same conclusions, but if they come up with it, then they own it. If they own it, they might make a decision. So it's about stakeholders. Which stakeholders will buy into the story and then take action on it also. So you got to really pay attention to the process and the stakeholders that you use to come to the output. Best example is a movie, Don't Look Up. If you get a chance to see it, Don't Look Up is they know the world is going to end. And they're still carrying on as if it's not going to end because they're going to make money or elections on the short term or something else. They know the data, they don't own it. And eventually when they own it, they'll make the decision accordingly. So connecting stakeholders with the insight is so important because that's where the action is taken. And then I think the other part which we see because of that is ultimately Watson or any other things can predict what's happening, but the number of variables are so many in reality that that's not the real point of predicting. And I think that's what Antonio already said. It's not exactly predicting, but it's being prepared for the different scenarios. So you have a plan B and a C, and the plan you choose hopefully can fit in multiple scenarios. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you're the most risk diversified to succeed. And I think this is so critical that people understand that we can't predict. We might want to. I know Antonio is about to predict something in February. We're going to get rich. But that's because the time has got so short now. That his ability and the variables are getting less and less, and they're getting more and more solid. But anything 2-3 years out, we have to be flexible. And I think that's what they're trying to teach us, flexibility and option thinking. Mm-hmm. Great question, Carlos. We'll bring AI to this table. By the way, Antonio, we have the digital capability to codify the process now. We got the ability to store all the data. And now the next thing is, what kind of AI engine do you want to put behind it to see if it's learning? The real point here is the amount of data we're collecting is too little to really do AI. We're still doing if then else type of thinking, structured thinking as like
we should talk, and I think there's a lot of potential. For instance, what I usually do it, but it doesn't matter. But it's I'll call it scanning the scanner. So you have a limited set of sources that they are credible and they already scan other sources. So you have your own data set of sources, then you do that, and then you do, it's easier to do it automatically with a more limited set of sources, but that's the...
Okay, guys, I'm going to bring this meeting to an end because we are going past 10:30. So I just want to, first of all, thank Antonio for this presentation. It always provokes people. It gets us thinking. Dr. Zurek, thank you. Enrique, Carlos, for all of you guys being here, Felipe, Jin Hong. Next week, we'll have another speaker. Who is planned for next week, Irila or Larissa? Can you hear you?
For the next week, we have Isuru, is our partner in Japan. Basically, he will talk about the state of innovation in Japan.
So Japan is what we're going to learn about. So who doesn't want to know about Japan? This country went from a leadership role to a follower role to back to a leadership role. And now it's still its own leader. It doesn't follow anybody. It does its own thing. Right? So we can learn a lot about Japan and Japan's creativity and its successes. Isuru is a GIMI Think Tank partner and a CTP. And first time I think he'll come into this meeting, hopefully. And this will hopefully engage him. Antonio, thank you very much for your presentation. Again, reminding everybody, new partner in Morocco, in North Africa, new partner in Norway. GIMI Kids has started. We've got a big initiative with Carlos Ohoda in Sabrai in Brazil. 2,000 people about to be trained. Dr. Zurek is doing assessors training and to create a cadre of auditors who will one day go audit governments and government entities. So that's a growth. It's an option. We're developing it and it's going fast with Dr. Zurek. And of course, language translations going on around the world. Oh my God, this is great. What a great start to a year.
If you allow me, just to say that we already have the brochure in Spanish for Foresight. The Foresight brochure is already in Spanish. Thank you very much for the GIMI core team for helping and for the collaboration. And we are already doing